It's coming up to 10 minutes to the hour. This is, of course, Paris Live PM. Well, Britain's divorce from the EU is high on the agenda at a two-day EU summit that opens in Brussels this Thursday. Brexit talks have been deadlocked over issues such as the rights of citizens affected by Brexit, the divorce bill price tag, and the status of the Northern Ireland border. Chances of a major breakthrough in Brussels this week have been downplayed. Although going into the summit, Prime Minister Theresa May did offer more assurances to EU nationals, and she also said that she would, quote, be setting out ambitious plans for the weeks ahead. Well, here to discuss this is today's guest, Raphaela Kitson-Pantano, Head of Communications for the Liberal Democrats in France, incidentally the only UK party that openly opposes Brexit. Thanks for being back on the programme.
Thank you.
Now, Theresa May's big hope is to finalise the first phase of talks so that trade talks can start. From the outset, she sought to broaden the conversation beyond those sticking points that have stalled things. One of those points concerns the future status of the 3 million EU nationals living in the UK and the 1 million Britons living in Europe. Over the past 24 hours, May has stepped up Britain's commitment, making it easier for EU citizens to become UK residents. How far will this gesture go towards moving the talks along? And is this what EU leaders have been waiting to hear?
I don't believe that is what EU leaders are waiting to hear. My understanding is that the point of divergence is that Theresa May has sought to guarantee the rights of EU citizens living in Britain by subjecting them to the rule of British courts whilst taking into account EU law. Whereas the European Union point of view is that they would like the EU citizens living in the UK to be subject to the European Court of Justice. And I think that until that issue is resolved, we're not going to find an agreement on that topic.
Okay, so a gesture, but it's more complicated than that. This summit has been set up as an important step in the timetable of negotiations for Brexit. Earlier this week, Theresa May met with the European Commission President, Jean-Claude Juncker, for dinner. They agreed to speed up the talks. There have been a lot of failed stops and starts here, countless rounds of negotiations. How important is this event really, and can we expect anything new to come out of it?
I think that we need to take a bit of perspective. This specific council, I don't think we should expect major breakthroughs. And if I'm wrong, I'll be happy to be wrong. But my understanding is that they're meeting tomorrow morning at 10:30 to discuss this topic. So today, for a start, they're talking about other subjects such as migration, the digital era, etc. And my understanding is that Michel Barnier, the chief negotiator, is not satisfied with the level of progress that they've achieved. And so, from what I understand, he's going to brief the EU heads of states to that effect. And so not much will come through, I don't think. However, I do think the perspective should come from the fact that the beginning of negotiations in this whole Brexit topic started only in June this year. So we're actually only talking about 5 months. And if you think back, it took the UK 3 attempts to join the EU. It took a lot more than 5 months to get them in. I think it's reasonable that it should take a bit more than 5 months to get us out.
It could be just par for the course. Now, the European Council President, Donald Tusk, says that he doesn't expect to see any kind of breakthrough at this summit. He does say, though, that it might be possible to wrap up phase 1 by the end of the year with lots of hard work. Paramount is more concrete proposals from the British side. Is the UK any closer to being able to offer this?
As you mentioned earlier on, there are 3 sticky points. The first is the Irish border, which I believe is really a very difficult topic, and they're going to have to find a solution. But the good thing about that topic is that everybody agrees to respect the Belfast Agreement and the Common Travel Area Agreement. And so therefore, I believe that there is real political will on that topic to find a solution that is common and useful to the citizens. With regards to the citizens living in the EU, in the UK, and the UK citizens living in the EU, again, there's this issue about the legalities, but I do believe that Theresa May is going to make a step forward to try and sort something out. Where the sticky point is going to be the hardest is about the money, because the discrepancy between what Theresa May is saying she would like to pay and what the EU expects is huge. I mean, Theresa May is talking about 20 billion, whereas the EU is talking about something around 60 to 100. So what we're really talking about is a money negotiation, and that could go fast or it could go very slowly.
Now, one of the reasons that the UK voted to leave the EU in the first place was because they wanted to avoid paying so much money into the EU. So how unpopular would a huge divorce bill be in Britain? How much pressure is on Theresa May to keep this figure low?
Theresa May is under an enormous amount of pressure. The hard Brexiteers already blaming her for being too close to the EU and are suggesting that she should walk out with no deal. Others suggest that she should try and make sure there is a deal. Of course, the citizens and the opposition parties are going to blame her for everything that she comes up with, and whatever the number, she's going to be blamed. So her interest is to keep that number as low as possible, but at the same time her interest is also that there is a deal, because the worst case scenario would that she would walk out without a deal.
Can you give us some insight into the mentality of the British electorate? You're from the only party that openly campaigned to remain in Europe. That was during the last elections in May. How have things changed since then? With everything going on, are people feeling perhaps that Brexit is more trouble than it's worth?
That is a tricky question. To be honest, I think that what's the most shocking is Theresa May's attitude. Jo Swinson, who's the deputy leader of the Liberal Democrats, said yesterday that she was shocked to see how Theresa May didn't seem to be backing her own government's decisions. And when Theresa May was asked whether or not she would vote for Brexit in another referendum, she said herself that, you know, she didn't know whether she would or she wouldn't. So I think that, yes, if there was another referendum, probably Theresa May wouldn't vote the same way that she did in the last one. With regards to the British electorate, I think that probably we would come to roughly the same results. I mean, the results were very close. It wasn't an overall majority in one case or in the other. I think that if we were to have another referendum, at least people would be better informed. Whether it would actually change the result, I don't know.
Now, I just want to revisit the issue of trade. You mentioned there that some ministers are urging Theresa May to walk away from negotiations if the EU refuses to talk about trade. If no deal on trade is reached, what would be the cost of that to Britain? And is this a major worry for businesses in the UK?
Yes, it is a major worry. The cost would be both financial and human. From a financial perspective, to be honest, I personally believe that no deal is inconceivable, because EU regulation is so intertwined into the whole way that business infrastructure is set up, that if we did walk away with no deal, it would cause a crisis beyond precedent for the UK and for the EU. From a human perspective, we were talking earlier on about the EU citizens living in the UK and the UK citizens living in the EU. Theresa May was very clear last week about the fact that if there is no deal, then she wouldn't know what would happen to the EU citizens living in the UK, and they wouldn't probably be able to benefit from the rights that they're able to benefit from at this stage. So I think that, at least I trust, perhaps wrongly, but I trust that Theresa May is well aware that a no-deal outcome is not the right one. And I think that that's why she's working so hard to try and get a deal at her own risk, because she's under an enormous amount of pressure within her own party. But yes, I hope that today the no-deal threat is just trying to put pressure on the negotiations.
Indeed, and I guess we'll get some idea tomorrow at the end of that EU summit in Brussels whether or not progress has been made in the Brexit talks. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. My thanks to Raphaela Kitson-Pantano, Head of Communications for the Liberal Democrats in France. Thanks for being on the programme.
Thank you very much.